not fooling me. I know it's for the business meeting.
Go ahead.
Well, Lord's so good to us. You know, I know that we don't always feel happy, but we can still know the joy of Jesus.
Yes.
And I maintain, I look back at my life, and the times of growth were usually through hard times. And some of those hard times didn't go away in a day.
Yeah.
No. You know, they seem to go on and on and on. And so, and if you haven't walked there, you can thank the Lord, because usually He tests His servants.
Yeah.
He allows us to go through times of trial. He set Job up. I can't say it any other way. God set Job up. Job never, as a matter of fact, Job never knew excuse me, what in the world happened. I mean, the world was going by nicely. He was looked to by everybody. Said he was the richest man in the East. And I assume that probably at that time meant the world. He was the richest man. In those days, you didn't have bank accounts. You owned it in land, in livestock.
Yeah.
And sometimes your greatest joy was not in all of those. And it's obvious that it wasn't for Job. His greatest joy was his family. And he prayed for them. I'm sure he prayed with them and for them to help them to find service to the Lord. Remember, Job really is the first book of the Bible. If you go to when it was written. It was written before Moses wrote the Pentateuch. Job was before the law. There's not a mention of the law. And the reason I just bring Job up is that I happened to be listening on the way in to a good preacher who was talking about Job. And someone basically calling Job in the arguments an idiot. Ever get somebody so mad at you that they called you some names? I see some smiles. Yeah. I'm sure that most every one of you in here has had somebody say a derogatory statement about you.
Yeah.
Sometime in your life. And we live in a day and age where I really believe this. People think that they're doing good when they can put good people down. Yeah. I believe we're living in that time where Antichrist is going to show himself. We're going to see him in this book. Yeah. Job wrote this, his book. We don't know exactly the times when he wrote it all down. But he lived 605 he was taken. I read the earliest today that I'd ever seen someone say that they thought he was. They said they thought he was about 12 years old. And so we're going to read some of that today. Not that he was 12. We really don't know. Most of us do believe he was probably a teenager. I think most of us believe that he was of nobility. He came from a family that might have been on the who's who list. And you'll see why I say that in a little bit as we will go down through. I believe Daniel was taken in the first raid that Nebuchadnezzar had. It was about the time he took over from his father. Somewhere probably the 630s, 630 or so BC, Babylon began to rear its head and began to become more and more powerful. Of course, we know Nebuchadnezzar ruled through the most powerful time of the empire. And we're going to find out more about that. Nebuchadnezzar was, I think for the most part, like most people, when you have all power, it goes to your head and your heart. It makes you feel that nothing you do or say can be wrong. He was a man that we will see who had a bad temper. I had some family members, not my kids or my wife, but in times past, some family members who have really, really bad tempers. And you know, often, I always say there's at least two kinds of bad tempers. There's one that's a hair trigger. It doesn't take them anything to flash. Or everything to flash. My dad came pretty close to that category. I told you, he had the fastest belt in the West. He could get that thing out and get you dancing around with no problem. And another member of our family that lost I don't know how many jobs because of his temper and his mouth. Be nothing for him to throw an entire toolbox at you if you made a man. Not a tool, the toolbox. I saw him one night when he got a little bit upset. In Buffalo area, we had churches that were competitive in fast pitch, softball, bowling, volleyball, basketball. We had several teams that were on the floor that night, and my uncle was on another team. And I watched him take a 15-pound bowling ball and was so mad, he threw it up 12 feet and almost put a hole in the ceiling. And when that ball came down and hit the floor, everybody had to see what made that explosion. I'm surprised he didn't crack the floor. You throw 16 pounds up, about 10, 12 feet in the air, you're coming down with a little bit of a whack. Yeah. I'm sure there must have been some kind of divot. The guys that bowled that line wondered why their ball always acted crazy right about there. But Nebuchadnezzar was a man of extreme temper. He was ready to kill you as well as look at you. We'll see that several times in our stories about him. We start tonight. History time is probably about 605 BC. And we will take a look at that. More than likely, because of the speed with which Nebuchadnezzar went back and forth, he did not take the route of the Fertile Crescent, which would have been the way that most sane people would have gone. But he was coming. He was a new king, and I think he was showing his authority. More than likely, he went through the desert because of the speed with which he came and left. About 605 BC, a bunch of Israelites, young men, were taken. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, we know those four were taken. This was a time where nobility was taken. Israelites taken to Babylon, about 605 BC. Daniel and his friends that I just mentioned were part of that group. And more than likely they were marched across the desert in the heat and brought to that land that if you grew up in Jerusalem, you had one time a beautiful temple, Solomon's temple, great beauty. That was probably the most beautiful thing that was in Jerusalem. Most of Jerusalem was probably not real beautiful. The temple was maybe the one place that was. But you've got to imagine this group of young men who were going to be in leadership. They were brought out of the land because they were handsome, good looking, and intelligent. They were going to go to a 3-year Bible school. No, one Bible school. They were going to the school of hard knocks under the domain of Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to talk about some of that in a little bit. We're going to see, this is the outline that I had, but I've added another one tonight too, and I'm going to work off that one, but this is the one you can take down, and you can add the other one if you want to. I call it the man of God, Daniel 1. He was a young man, but apparently he was a young man who was steeped in the theology of the Hebrews. He might have been young, but he had a real knowledge of what he should do and shouldn't do. He apparently had good parents and good grandparents. I think it takes sometimes both. That raised him, maybe even in a rabbinical school to that point, where he would learn the things that were in their religion, the things that were in their history, which Daniel seemed to understand some of that history. In this outline, we have three parts, which is in your outline. We have Daniel's being deported to Babylon. He's deported to Babylon. They came and took him. Now, I may not agree that he was 12, but I do believe, because he's going to live 70 years and still be healthy, still in service, able to do service for the Lord after 70 some years. Well, 70 years, you were 15 or 16, it'll make about 86 when we come near the end of this story for Daniel. And he may well have lived well into his 90s. But he was deported to Babylon. Second, 8 through 16, his deportment in Babylon, how he took care of himself, how he handled himself. We are going to see some of that tonight, how he stood for God and stood for his faith. You know, there are some times where you and I maybe haven't done so well standing for our faith. And I always look at those things as sad times of missed opportunities. Often too busy, too much to do. Might be just the other side of it. You just didn't care at that moment. You know, and as Christians, don't tell me there's sometimes you kind of just don't care. We kind of all go through that. Let me take a sip of this coffee here. I think I caught one of Jerome's frogs from Sundays when he but deportment, how he handled himself, what he did. And then his development in Babylon, 17 through 21. I believe he was a true man of God, a man who any of us probably would have been proud to be a friend of. And I think if you had Daniel for a friend, you had somebody that really would watch out for you, be concerned about you. Here's my alternative outline that I came up over the last year as I studied through the book. I probably, every time I would go through a book, I probably could do a whole other outline with some similarity. But this is an alternative outline that I'm going to work from. Again, the man of God. Same verses. This one breaks out a little differently. Daniel taken. Daniel taken. And I'm going to read those verses. Daniel taken. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem to besiege it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylon, or Babylonia. The Hebrew name for that, by the way, is Shinar. Shinar would have been what the Hebrews called Babylon, Shinar. And it was put into the treasury, it says, of his God. And that actually, if it was the way probably it should say, put in the treasury house of his gods. His gods. Then the king ordered, this is Nebuchadnezzar, Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Here's the charge to one of the king's leaders who was going to take over, whether he did it or had others do it. He was in charge. Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials. This was the head dog of the court. Was to pull out some of those that came for some specialized stuff. So Daniel's been taken. He's been pulled out to be in a special group that are going to be trained. We're going to see some more about that. Our next, in this outline, number 2, is Daniel was teachable, verses 4 through 7. Daniel was teachable. Here was what these guys were. Young men, without any physical defect, handsome, showing an aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. These guys are going into some big-time stuff here, aren't they? Yeah. They're going to be in the place of the king, some of them. And I'm sure not very many of them. Some of them. To serve at the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. Also, if you sometimes read in some history book, Chaldeans, that's the same word. Maybe a different language, but Babylonians or Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. These guys were living high in the hog. They got the best food in the kingdom, these young men. Now let me tell you, this was quite a place. And I'm sure that when it says they're eating from the king's table, it's the best. It's the best of what he thinks is really good stuff. They were to be trained for, here's the school. In those days, it was a 3-year school in Babylon. Now you got to remember, these guys are learning a new culture and a whole bunch of other stuff, which we'll take a look at. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Now, those names may look strange to you. Because of a song, you never knew those names. Because we all know them as Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. And if I had asked you what their three Hebrew names were, most of you maybe wouldn't know. Now, you're pretty sharp folk here, but I've done this in other places and didn't give them those names. And I said, who was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? And some of them were hard-pressed to say, you know, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. The chief official gave them new names. Daniel, name was going to be Belteshazzar, not to be mixed up with a king known as Belshazzar. This is Belteshazzar. Hananiah, Shadrach, Meshach, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. And so there was the beginning of some of the brainwashing that was going to continue to take place. Our third part of the outline is verses 8 through 16. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I'm afraid of my Lord, or is he talking about the king, Nebuchadnezzar, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. See, when the king puts you in responsibility for someone else, if they didn't turn out like the king wanted them to turn out, off with your head, you know, or more than likely maybe into the lion's den. So we have these young men, and so what Daniel does and his three friends, let's start with verse 12. Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. Daniel there, he may be a teenager, but he's pretty smart. He doesn't say, no, we're not going to do it. He just says, give us a test. Just 10 days. And see how we look at the end of 10 days. He didn't confront him and say no. He didn't say, we're just not going to do this, stamp his feet, and his four friends walk out. He said, give us a test. Let's see how we look and how they look after 10 days. Well, 15. At the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. Mission stew with no meat. Yeah. See, God can bless when we're trying to serve Him. You would think that for sure the guys that were eating all this fine food would look way better than them. Didn't happen. Just didn't happen. After the 10 days, they looked better. And then finally, Daniel, after the 3 years are up, the college degree was given. And the degree was given by none other than the king who did the final examination. It's going to be an oral exam. What have you learned? What do you know? Let's see what happened. Verse 17. Then these 4 young men, God gave knowledge. That's a good way to get knowledge. God gave knowledge. And understanding of all kinds of literature. In other words, anything thrown in front of them, any language they were learned. Of course, they had to learn new language. Read in new language. Study in a new language. But it says God gave them understanding in all kinds of literature and learning. And it says Daniel went above all of them, that God gave him the ability to understand dreams and visions. 18, at the end of the time set by the king, well, how long was the time? 3 years. 3 years. If you don't believe me, go back to verse 5. And it says they were to be trained for 3 years. So after the 3 years, verse 17. To these 4 men, God gave knowledge, understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. Daniel could understand visions, dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego later on. So they entered the king's service. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better. 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters, not in this new group. Where? In his entire kingdom of those who were advising him. These young men had it above all those that had been in the court for years and years in knowledge and understanding. And then this little phrase, and Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. And of course, that's when Babylon fell. We'll be seeing all those dates. I think it's around 539 or 536. All right. We were talking about some of this. Let's take a look at it. Brainwashing. We heard of the Japanese and Germans trying to brainwash some of our young men and send them back as spies. Get in official areas and have people who they had completely brainwashed And they came back a different person than when they went. And they didn't work for the American government any longer. They worked for Germany or Japan as a spy. Well, brainwashing. They were taken to a completely new location. This was a city of cities. You came to it. It must have been staggering to come to it. All kinds of gold and stuff inlaid around the openings. Tremendous high walls. It said that teams of horses could run around the walls side by side. It was basically an unpenetrable city to get into. Walls high, walls wide. And then when you walk down what we would call in most cities Broadway, the main street, you would see some of the most dazzling, spectacular buildings you've ever seen in your life. Inlaid with gold and mosaics and beautiful structures built into them as they went down. They would see maybe down further on the end, the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Nebuchadnezzar married a country girl, came out of the mountains, and she missed her mountains. Nebuchadnezzar literally built a mountain in Babylon City proper. With plants and things just like every other mountain, they have trees and the whole works. You got to know how wonderful this thing must have looked if it was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Because there are some pretty spectacular wonders amongst those 7. So new location, that was the most spectacular place they'd ever been in their lives. Let's kick our feet up. What happens in Babylon stays in Babylon. Yeah. New food. Most of these guys didn't eat like King Nebuchadnezzar was eating. Even the kings of Jerusalem did not have the spread or the wherewithal that Nebuchadnezzar had at this time. It was a completely new culture. You know, for young people, how many young people that were good Christians, it seemed, through grade school and all the Sunday school they went to, got in 8th or 9th grade, and people say peer pressure happened. And they went off the rails. They went completely nuts. You wouldn't recognize it was your son or daughter. They were in a culture where this was as good as you could live. The only other place that maybe lived almost as good as them would have been some of the spots in Egypt, which was one of the great kingdoms as well of its day. It was a new language. It was a new language they were learning. And then, to set it all off, they have taught you everything but your culture, everything but your history, everything that would go against your history. And now, just in case you still had some memories, they're going to take your name away. Daniel, anything that ends in EL has something to do with God. Right, my brother? My professor friend here. E.L. Well, here it's God is my judge. God is my judge. Daniel's name tied him to Yahweh. Yahweh, Jehovah, he's my judge. Well, see what happened. God called Belshazzar in the courthouse and in all his daily operations and in his work that he was going to do. And that meant Bel's prince. Bel. One of the gods of Babylon. See, they're going to make them forget everything. Their name is not going to be used. Daniel used his name in writing. His name was not used in the courthouse. His name was not used in daily life. His name was forgotten except by him. Because of who he was. He was going to be Belteshazzar from then on through the next 70 years. Actually, 67 now. Well, let's see what they did to Hananiah. His name meant gracious is Jehovah, or gracious is Yahweh. Hananiah, gracious is Yahweh. Let's see what they did for him. He became Shadrach, which meant illumined by the sun god. Remember, this was a polytheistic kingdom. You say, what is polytheistic? It just means it's a fancy word for many gods. They had a God for everything. God of the water, a God of the field, a God of the corn, a God of the wheat. You name it, there was a God for everything. Shadrach, illumined by the sun god. Let's see about Mishael. This is a nice name, Mishael, who is as God. Boy, wouldn't that be a great name? Who is as God. Who is as Jehovah. Yahweh. Names meant something back in this day. Well, he was going to forget that name. He's not going to be called that ever again. He becomes Meshach. Meshach. What the moon god is. What the moon god is. And then lastly, Azariah. The Lord is my help. I like that one too. The Lord is my help. Azariah. I take that name. The Lord is my help. Azariah. Well, let's see what Abednego means. Servant of Nebo, or Nebu. Servant of Nebu. And that was going to be their names from then on, wherever they were. Now in private, you know, they may have called each other by their Hebrew names. But for all intents and practices, they are going to hear these four names thousands of times in their lifetime as people come in, because they're going to be in leadership. And when they sign a bill of lading, or when they sign something for the king, or when they send something out, what name do you think they got to use? You got to use those names that were given them. Well, I think the world tries to do that to us, and I just wanted to throw this in. This is free. No extra for this. The world says, be conformed. God says, be transformed. Be transformed. Well, in what ways? Well, in dress. We live in a world where, I hate to say it, if you go out to the beach, you don't have to have any guess what some of these ladies look like when they wear their string bikini. There's not much left to wonder. In dress, the world wants us to be caught up in its fashions, its forms, and what it is and what it does. God says Christian modesty is to be our answer. The world says be conformed in speech. In speech. Most of the speech I hear today is not all that good. The Bible says we're to be people who use words that build up, not tear down. We're to build people up, not tear them down. The world says be conformed in religion. Now, I know we who are Christians don't consider what we are as a religion. We believe it's past it. It's a relationship. But we are stacked as a religion. In religion, serve Christ. Serve Christ. In education, study the Word along with anything else you're learning. Keep the Word part of your vocabulary, part of who you are. Now, we who studied to be preachers and went to maybe Bible school or Christian college or to seminary, we had pretty good luck that we knew we were going to be studying the Bible a good share of the time. But a good share of the world, my early life, I worked gas station attendants, I worked in construction, I worked at General Motors. I have some stories. In social life, take up your cross, Jesus says, and follow me. In our lives, we need to not be caught up in the things of the world, but we need to be walking with the Lord, for the Lord. And you can do that any place. All those places I mentioned just a minute ago, to my best ability, I lived as a man of God. You can do it. You can do it. Even then, I was a young man like Daniel. I was a couple years older, probably in my early 20s when I was at General Motors, probably about 19 when I was in construction. So, you know, those still are years that you're still learning a lot. In ethics, be holy and truthful. You can't go far wrong being holy and truthful. In pleasure, seek the kingdom of God. He says, seek first the kingdom, and then what? All these things will what? Be added unto you. The world's answers and God's answers are not the same. And I just want to show you one more thing here. Daniel and his friends, through that section where they were choosing and studying. Well, the first one that they had, Daniel and his friends. Now you notice I got a triangle. In the triangle, one side of it's going what? Going up, isn't it? All right, there's a purpose to that. Their first trial was for how long? 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, they were better. They were better than all the others. In 10 days, they were better than the others. In 3 years, they were 10 times better. 10 times better. Now, that came from the horse's mouth, didn't it?
Yeah.
Who was given this test, and who had given this test probably many times to young men and kingdoms they had conquered that they thought might be good for the court. Good to be in the presence of the king. Good to do business for the king. Good to stand up for the king. A lot. He found these better than all he had and all that was there. Not a little better. A 10 times is pretty good. It's better than you probably could hope for. They were 10 times better. Well, may God bless our study.
Yes.
Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for Daniel. We thank you for this young teenager who came to a foreign land, who is going to have to battle languages, different ethics, different culture, different clothing, different food. And he and his 4 friends would stand for you. Lord, if these young teenagers could do that, we have to ask ourselves a question: why can't we?
Yes.
And the answer should be, we can. So Lord, bless our study.
Yes.
We're going to see many wonderful things and odd things and things that are almost like a storybook. But they're real.
Yes.
We pray now, Lord, for our folk. We thank you for this good crowd.
Yes.
We thank you for those who are maybe watching us and those who are going to watch us. Lord, continue to bless our services that go out over YouTube and Facebook.
Yes.
Use them to bless folks, to bless us, to use us. And may we continue to grow in reputation. May someone say, hey, if you heard that Midway Baptist, turn into it. I think you'll like it. Lord, we ask that that might be the case. Bless our folks, Lord.
Yes.
May we be a blessing to you. May we serve you well. May we make good choices like Daniel and his friends did. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.